And welcome back. Here we have a 2013 Chevy Sonic with a 1.8 liter engine, and we're going to go ahead and remove the factory airbox and replace it with a K&N short ram intake. So first off, we're going to go ahead and remove the negative battery cable. Now we can remove the MAF sensor. On the bottom you can see a small red tab, and all you have to do is pull it outward and it's going to let you press on the tab to release the connector. Once you get that out of the way, we can remove the two fasteners that actually hold the MAF sensor down. Once you get the sensor off the car, make sure you set it in a safe location where nothing's going to happen to it, because even something as simple as dropping the sensor could result in a damaged sensor that isn't going to work properly. On top of that, these sensors are not cheap to replace. So personally, I just grabbed my sensor and I set it on the driver's seat where I knew no harm would come to it. Next, we're going to focus on removing the factory airbox, which is just held on with a few fasteners around its perimeter. Once we get those out of the way, you could remove your factory air filter and then the bottom half of the airbox, which all of it is pretty easy to get out, so it should not give you any trouble at all. Now the bottom half of this airbox is just held on like with some rubber grommets, and it just kind of stays in place with that. So there's no screws or bolts or anything that you have to remove. You simply just pull it upward and it should come out. Now there's one more clamp at the base of the throttle body that we have to loosen up in order to get this tube off. Now as you can tell, I'm using power tools wherever I can, and it's just to speed up the process for me, but you could definitely get this job done with basic hand tools, so don't let it discourage you that I'm using power tools. Now that we have this tube off of the car, you could go ahead and set it aside because we're no longer going to need it. But it's a good idea to go ahead and inspect it right now because it is prone to failing. This Sonic has relatively low miles on it, and yet this part has already failed and been replaced once at the dealer, so it doesn't hurt to inspect it right now. They usually tend to crack in the rubber right there, which causes vacuum leaks. Okay, so here's a K&N kit that we're going to be using. This one is specific to the 1.8 liter Chevy Sonic. Now there was some crazy glue or super glue supplied in this kit, and they tell you to put it right at the base right here of this black plastic piece. I'm not really sure what the purpose of it, because this piece is really in there, like really tight. It's really difficult to try to get it out if you tried. I can't see what crazy glue is going to do to hold this in place, because I think it's in there pretty tight already, so we just skipped over the crazy glue. And next we're just going to go ahead and get the rubber coupler and put it on the throttle body itself. Don't forget to put your clamp on it. Actually, you want to put both clamps on it right now. One of them is to clamp onto the throttle body, and the other one is to clamp onto the intake itself. Now it should go without saying to obviously face the clamp in the direction that makes it easy for you to get to. In my case, I went ahead and kind of faced them forward, that way I could just come from the front here with my ratchet and tighten it down. You don't want to face it in some direction where it just makes it impossible to get to. There's no point in making your life harder. So after you get the bottom clamp all tightened up, just go ahead and set the other clamp in place, and then you could grab the K&N intake tube and go ahead and get that started. You're gonna have to wiggle it back and forth a little bit, but eventually it'll go in, and then you could just set your clamp in place. You don't have to tighten it just yet because you're gonna have to make a few minor adjustments. Now you just have to grab your heat shield and your rubber trim, and we're just gonna go ahead and press it in all the way around the heat shield. Could be a little bit tricky to get to, but eventually it'll work itself out. It's not as hard as it looks, and by the time you're done with it, you're gonna have some excess rubber, so of course you're gonna have to trim it. Now you want to cut the rubber about an inch away from that 90-degree bend, and the reason why you want that is because you have to make space for the bracket that's going to go on here. So here's the bracket that has to go in place, and as you can see, this is why we cut the rubber trim at least an inch away from that 90-degree bend. The kit comes with 4 fasteners, and as you can see, one of them is longer than the other 3. We're going to use the 3 short fasteners to install these brackets, and of course it also came with supplied washers, so make sure you put a washer on the front and the back of each fastener. And here's an easy mistake to make, which is the bracket is facing in the wrong direction. You want it facing downward, not upward, how we had it the first time. Now that all of that is taken care of, we just have to remove one of the fasteners on the engine mounts, which would be the one closer to the back of the engine. Now this can be a little tricky to record, so I'm going to demonstrate how the bolt goes onto the heat shield while it's off the car. So we're going to put the bolt in first, and then there's a supplied washer that comes in the kit and it goes on the bottom, and that's how you're going to install this. So I'm just going to go ahead and put the washer in place first, and then grab the heat shield and run the bolt through it. And that's an easy way of doing this. Once you get the intake tube nice and centered inside of the heat shield, and this looks pretty good right here, so we're just going to go ahead and tighten down that one fastener on the engine mount. And once again, once you're happy with the position of the intake tube inside of the heat shield, you could go ahead and grab your clamp that you left back here before, and now it's time to tighten it up. Now that we got all of that sorted out, we're going to move on to installing the final bracket. We're going to use a longer fastener, and make sure you use your washer, and I believe there's also a lock washer that goes on here. So I'm just kind of lightly threading it onto the intake tube itself, and we're going to go ahead and line up the other end with the heat shield, and we're going to use that last remaining fastener, and of course don't forget to use washer on both sides, and we're just going to go ahead and get this one all tightened up as well. Now something to be cautious about is that you're threading this fastener into a piece of aluminum. Aluminum is a very soft metal, so it's easy to damage and pull the threads out of it. Once you feel the fastener gets snug, just go ahead and leave it there. There's no need to overkill it. And now you could go ahead and install your air filter. Now I found that the air filter kept wanting to slip off whenever we put the clamp in front of the heat shield. So by moving the clamp back here, it just seemed to have a lot more space to clamp onto, and this seemed to work well. Okay, so we're almost done here. All we have to do is grab our map sensor and go ahead and reinstall it. Now one thing I will pick out about this kit, one thing I didn't like, is that they decided to not utilize the OEM fasteners for holding on the map sensor. They have a supplied screw here, but the problem with it, number one, is it's a hex. It's no longer a torque screw, and I'm not really a fan of hex to begin with. Second of all, it's a very fine thread pitch. So as you can see here, I decided to install the lower one first, and I had my hand pretty much right on center with the screw itself. Basically, I don't have my hand on the actual handle of the ratchet, so to minimize the amount of torque I can apply to this, and even with that, I felt that I was starting to pull the threads on the aluminum. So with this top screw, I'm actually just tightening it with my fingers, just in fear of damaging the threads also. So yeah, that's something I could just go ahead and pick out about this kit. I didn't like that. Push come to shove, we would have to remove the 2 fasteners, re-tap it, and use or tap a new thread into it with a more coarse thread pitch, and change the fasteners that we're going to be using. With that out the way, let's move on to this. Now that the battery cable is off the car, and you can see there was some corrosion and stuff on here, so it's a good opportunity to go ahead and clean up your negative battery cable at this point, and then you could go ahead, reinstall it, and of course tighten it down. And we're pretty much all done here. Now my thoughts on this intake is it's a very quality intake. Trust me, I've installed some cheap intakes like eBay intakes, and this is nowhere near that. This is actually a really high quality kit. It fit very well. Everything was nice and solid by the time you're done. You heard my one thing that I was nitpicking about it. Other than that, it's a great kit. Now you can see the check engine light here. So once you get your car started, you want to make sure that the check engine light obviously goes off, and it does, so everything looks good here. And that's it. So I know it's not my normal type of repair video, but at any rate we got it done. I hope it helps anyone out there who's looking to install a kit like this on their Chevy Sonic. You know, now you're gonna have those few extra ponies to your advantage, so watch out for speeding tickets. But if you liked the video, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't like the video, give it a thumbs down. Don't forget to follow me on Instagram. That's where I post all my updates. Like I said, I hope you did like it. Consider subscribing, and thanks for watching.